Policy is a brilliant policy document. There's nothing on the accessibility. Why is sports not been given any importance, which is something that I truly I cannot even understand how. Then who's going to hold all of this accountable? That's a vague gray area. Any policy that we give, unless there is a buy-in from the teachers and the parents, it will fall flat. Who's going to fund the private sector? Who's going to fund the government sector? Schools are getting frustrated. They themselves don't know what to do. Schools are in crisis today. Even the good schools of 30, 40 years are also into financial crisis because of this lockdown. Create a level playing field. Why you're always saying schools have to be not-for-profit? Implemented in the right spirit, in the right way. 3 language is phenomenal. Poor child in 5th standard has to start learning Hindi and Marathi from scratch. Is it possible? Main agenda was to bring down the dropout rate. The torch bearers of our education system are our teachers. Today, teaching may not be that a sort of profession. How would a 50-year-old teacher start to relearn herself and adapt to a 25-year-old teacher to take the same exam? How are the parents going to be brought on board? And whose money are they flashing? They're flashing investors' money. They are our foot soldiers who are going to take it to our children. I think that will create a lasting difference in our education system. How are we going to inspire these children to take education seriously? Digital literacy is fundamental. Where I am born does not determine what I become in life. That is where you will see a real revolution in our education system.
Welcome to another edition of the NEP Debate. We've been having a series of conversations about what the new education policy is going to do for India and how it's going to transform our lives. Today, we're very happy to have with us on the show, Dr. Kannan Gireesh. Thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Kannan. Dr. Kannan, of course, is a very well-known psychiatrist. He's an early childhood learning expert. He's somebody who's dealt with children from across the spectrum. He's done workshops at over 500 schools, Doctor?
Yeah.
Maybe 1,000?
Yeah.
Have you lost count?
Yeah.
So Dr. Kannan is somebody who's been on the ground. He's been working with children. He's been working with teachers. He's been working with educators. So it's fair to say that he's somebody who knows the education system at the very grassroots of it. Right? And of course, Dr. Kannan also is a social commentator, and he's somebody who talks a lot about issues that concern the youth in India. So we're very glad to have you on the show, Dr. Kannan. Welcome.
Very, very warm welcome. Welcome to all the viewers. Thank you, Daniel, and thank you, the New Indian Express, for having me.
To begin with, for the last 2 weeks, everybody's been talking about the NEP, right? It's from political circles to hardcore education circles. Everybody's talking about the NEP and what life is going to be like in the next few years, next few decades even. I'm sure you've been through the policy. What is it that you particularly like? What you think is revolutionary in the policy? And what you think could have been done better, or that you don't particularly like?
So, as far as I am concerned, first, before when we get into NEP, we should first, Daniel, understand the context of an NEP. Okay, the first education policy was started in 1948, 1949, when our independence, we just got independence. That was where the first polity, which was called the University Education Commission, which was done by Dr. Radhakrishnan. So that was the one that was started the seed of it. Then you had the Secondary Education Committee, which was done by Lakshman Swamy Mudaliar. Now, this is where the NCERT and the training and all of that came. That time itself, it was the main agenda was to bring down the dropout rate, give universal access to education, and give the best possible for our children and make them skillful. So this was there right back in 1952-53 itself. Okay. Then we started coming into the National Education Policy of 1968. And that's where the Kothari Commission, 64 and 66 was the Kothari Commission, which in 68, Indira Gandhi launched the National Education Commission. And that was the first time we had the 3-language policy. Now, everybody knows about the revolution that happened in Tamil Nadu because of the Kothari Commission. And the 3-language, and that's where we had the whole Dravidian movement and all that. So that time, I'd like to read out a document from that time. It says very beautifully, it dealt with training and quality of teachers in schools, stress on moral education, indication of stress on social responsibility, introduction of work experience. So today we are saying vocational education, work experience in school curriculum had been instituted in 1968 by Indira Gandhi in the Kothari Commission itself. Then the policy envisioned on focus on learning regional languages. That's where the 3-language formula came, and there was a whole hue and cry about it. Then you had the one in 1976, and then you had the National Policy on Education 1986. So this 86 one, which was again modified in 92. These were the two last ones that we had as an education policy. So literally this has been overdue for almost close to the last 30, 40 years. In my opinion, okay, I'm quote unquote, my opinion, I think the policy is a brilliant policy document. It's a brilliant policy document. If even implemented to 50% of what they are saying over there, I think it will be a revolution in Indian education. There is no two ways about it. It's a brilliant document. But where does the NEP as such come down? What are the areas that has not been addressed in the NEP? The number one area I totally feel which has not been addressed in the NEP is the area of how is the implementation going to happen. Timelines are been given very beautifully by this. Who's going to fund the timelines? Who's going to fund the private sector? Who's going to fund the government sector? Now, if they say 6% GDP, 6% GDP is 2.5 lakh crores. Now, this 2.5 lakh crores has to fund the salaries, the infrastructure cost. At least around 50 schools per year should come to meet that ratio of bringing back 2 crores children back into schools. Then you have the logistical costs of setting up AI labs, preschools, Anganwadis, Balwadis. Totally, there's nothing given on the funding timeline. Second, there's nothing on the accessibility. Now, say for example, a parent who's staying in a particular locality cannot afford the school nearby. What will happen? Because today you all know what has happened with the RTE. Lot of reimbursements are pending with the government. Schools are getting frustrated. They themselves don't know what to do. But how are we going to bring up the infrastructure cost, and who's going to bear the cost for government schools and private schools to bring all of these projects into the realm? That's not at all been told. Second, you have teachers today who have been teaching for 20 to 30 years. You're talking about putting them into again B.Ed, and by 2030, everybody should have done your 3-year B.Ed curriculum. Now, how would a 50-year-old teacher start to relearn herself and adapt to a 25-year-old teacher to take the same exam? I think that's going to be a huge, huge, huge challenge to bring all the teachers into the spectrum of teaching. Second, what are we giving to incentivize our teacher? Please understand, the torch bearers, I repeat, the torch bearers of our education system are our teachers. What have we brought out over there? How are they going to be incentivized? How are talented people going to be incentivized to come and get into teaching? Today, teaching may not be that a sort of profession, but how are we going to incentivize that? Second, who is going to take the accountability? Now, say for example, the central government. Central government has the Kendra Vidyalayas. State government has all the state government schools. Then the corporation has the corporation schools. So now do you see there's a total difference in who controls which school. So who's going to take the accountability for implementation of this to the T? The second point, and another very important point in the implementation that I'm going to see is they're talking about schools as non-profit. Very clearly, it's not for profit, philanthropy, people only should get into school education. Perfect. But what about, they are also teaching school education in online. What about, nothing about that. These are for-profit companies who just create one video out of the same content, sell it to 2 million, 10 million children, and then make a huge killing and a profit out of it, and use that money for branding, which our poor school cannot even survive. Today, because of the COVID, schools are unable to survive, to pay their salaries, to pay the electricity bill, to pay the corporation taxes. Schools are in crisis today. Even the good schools of 30, 40 years are also into financial crisis because of this lockdown. So what are you going to do to make a robust model? How could you tell schools to be not for profit, but at the same time, all allied people who are running school online are allowed to make a profit out of it? That's a very, very unfair field. Now look at a 50-year-old teacher with so much of passion, she's going to teach a subject. Now when a teacher teaches with so much of passion, what about her incentivizing and her, what about her? How are we going to take care of her? So something on that area is something that I was totally waiting for, which was not at all covered. Another very important area that was not at all covered inside of that is I totally believe is that the parents. How are we going to educate our parents that tomorrow onwards it is just not rote learning? Because it is the parents who pay the money and put their children into rote learning, coaching classes, and all of this. Now, how are we going to educate the parents to tell no, rote learning is not the only thing. You have to go through other areas also. Those areas are also going to incentivize. Nothing has been mentioned about that. How are the parents going to be brought on board?
Since you brought up the question of parents, and coming back to your previous point about how internet providers or online education providers who have
Yes.
now grown by over 500, 600%,
Yeah.
owing to the COVID pandemic and the subsequent lockdown. You're right, they have been growing. There is no regulation that really checks them, right? In fact, some of them are already sponsoring cricket teams. They're also trying to sponsor the IPL, which means that there's a whole lot of money involved. But parents are investing in this because they do believe in their kids' future. And to a certain point, do you not agree that it is every parent's right to invest their hard-earned money where they believe they will best see value?
Perfect. Now, what I'm saying is, parents, let them invest the money, but who is going to hold these companies accountable? Now, I also bought a for my daughter. My daughter is not interested because the content is just like a cartoon. And now, who's going to hold these people accountable? Now, you look at a school. There is a CBSE board. There is a government board. There are so many levels. There's accountability for the school to deliver on its promises. Now, these don't have any deliverable on their promises. The second thing that I always say a lot about this is that, see, this is creating a kind of a thing. Now, our own teacher who's teaching online with her own experience, the children, our parents are not ready to pay the fees, but the parents are paying the fees to because they think it's a big brand. They're flashing the money. And whose money are they flashing? They're flashing investors' money, predominantly Chinese and then global investors. Now, look at a school. If a school wants to compete with them, what is the only way the school can compete? They can only go for a loan. Now, when they go for a loan, there is an interest attached. Then they have to mortgage properties. And then only they have to sustain to compete with these big majors. I think what I think is, my personal opinion, create a level playing field. Why you're always saying schools have to be not for profit? Like how it's in the US. In US, you have two types of schools. You have for-profit schools, not for-profit schools. People who want to select for-profit schools, select for-profit. Not for-profit, go for not-for-profit. And the beauty of that is, Daniel, that when you have a lot of for-profit schools, the for-profit schools end up paying more taxes. And the tax can be in that area can be used for that area government schools upliftment. This is how the American system works. Why not do something like that for the Indian system? That's my only take on this. And another thing I also want to tell Daniel inside of this is, there is no mention, I repeat, there is no mention of sports. Where has the sports gone? Today you have schools that are being allowed to build in 10 grounds of land. And in the curriculum, in the NEP, you're telling that there's going to be marks given for sports and extracurricular activities. Where is the school going to create these extracurricular activities and sports? Where are the schools going to have these playgrounds? In almost all urban cities, schools are built one on top of the other in 10 grounds and 20 grounds. The schools that have come in the last 10 years because of the government nomination. Now, where are those children going to get marks? So sports is something that I think has never been given any importance inside of this NEP. Why I will tell you, Daniel. Now, look at India. We only play cricket. Cricket is the only sport that's generating income for a large number of people. No other sport generates a kind of substantial income. So because of which we are losing out on $1 trillion industry. You look at United Kingdom. Football alone generates billions and billions of pounds over there. Why? Because there are people traveling, there is restaurants, there's ticketing, there's a whole ecosystem developed. Same goes with the United States, same goes with any developed country. Now in India, considering it's a national education policy coming after 30 years, all of us were looking out for some guidelines on sports. Say, for example, if children pursue sports, do very well in sports, they are guaranteed this much amount of marks in the exam. Then parents are more eager to send their children for sports. Why is sports not been given any importance, which is something that I truly I cannot even understand how. The second thing I really don't understand is, now India is looking more of a globalized country. Now you have a child in Chennai, he is going to study English and Tamil. Now, if the father gets transferred to Mumbai, say in the 5th standard, the child has to study English, Marathi, and Hindi. Now, imagine a poor child in 5th standard has to start learning Hindi and Marathi from scratch. Is it possible? Come on, that's something that we should think about. Because today, my child can be in third standard in one school and be fifth standard in another school. How are we going to adapt to it? How is the NEP going to come up to this?
Brought up this point of children and languages. I, of course, was going to come to a little later. But since you brought it up, not just the NEP, but research also suggests that, from the age of, say, 3 and 4, they say that children their minds are so absorptive that they can learn multiple languages and they're extremely keen and the retention power is fantastic at that age. And research, of course, talks about exposing them to multiple languages, As a psychiatrist, what is your take on this?
100%. I agree with that. 3-language formula is very, very good if implemented in the right spirit, in the right way. I again repeat, implemented in the right spirit, in the right way. 3-language is phenomenal. I totally believe, I'm a firm believer that every child should learn 3 language. Why? Between the ages of 0 to 6 and 9 is where your language learning capacity is the best. I repeat, it is the best. Because that's where your absorption capacity is also very, very high and your intellect capacity is also developing. So I'm a firm believer that you should have 3-language policy, no doubt about it. But the problem is in the implementation. Now, I just wanted to tell you, 79,000 students, I repeat, 79,000 students in the SSLC failed in Hindi in Uttar Pradesh.
This that was quite sensational when it happened a year ago.
Now, what do you, like, where are the teachers to teach the children Hindi? Now, when you don't have the infrastructure, then this will fall flat on each of our faces. Now, we need to create that infrastructure. How are you going to get the best people to come for teaching? How are you going to incentivize them? How are you going to inculcate that culture of them wanting to upgrade themselves? Now, none of that has been mentioned in the NEP. Sports has not been mentioned in the NCP. Then art and culture, there's just the word art and culture. Now, what do you mean by art and culture? Are you talking about drawing? Are you talking about dance? Are you talking about theater? Are you talking about the Indian ancient dance culture? What are you doing? And how are you going to inculcate that into the system? Is there going to be somebody who's going to monitor it? How is the monitoring going to happen? And the last, I think, is the report card. They're telling now the report card is going to include academics and non-academics and extracurricular. Now, let me ask you, will IIT give me admission based on non-academics, period? Will I get a medical college admission if I do very well in the non-academics and I pass through the academics? What would be the balance ratio? How will that balance ratio come? So these are things I think the NEP has not at all addressed these issues. And I really think that they should be, see, as a educationist, look at school owners. He has to give a land. He has to take a loan and invest in a building. He has to do all the infrastructure, then pay salaries. Now, if the school doesn't do well because of, say, the parents not paying the fees or any other issue, what is the protection for him? Why are our teachers being left in the lurch? 55,000 teachers today have lost their jobs. More than 1 million of them are not getting salaries, their full salaries or salaries on time, only because of this lockdown and what has happened. So what is the insurance you're going to give? If this continues over a period of time, you will be really hard to attract good people to come into education. Now, more people will look at, okay, why don't we go to other jobs? So then what happens to the future of our country? I truly believe teachers are our torch bearers. And if we as a society don't take care of them, then any policy that we bring in will fall flat on the face because they are our foot soldiers who are going to take it to our children.
Doctor, there's since you brought up teacher, and of course, teacher training is something that that the NEP has dealt with in a fair amount of detail.
Very, very detailed. Yes.
They talk about how, to ensure that outstanding students enter the teaching profession, especially from the rural areas. They talk about merit-based scholarships, special merit-based scholarships, preferential employment. And they also talk about, doing away with this harmful practice of excessive teacher transfers that you keep hearing of, which is a major reason why many teachers leave their jobs, even government teaching jobs. But when you look at it today, you kept saying that teachers are torchbearers and you feel that not enough has been done for them.
To incentivize them.
Okay. Do you genuinely believe that in between the government sector and the private sector, do you think that we have not incentivized them to a fair degree?
Exactly. There's a huge pay scale difference between a government school teacher, where the government school teacher is paid excessively more than a private school teacher. But the government teacher is very less accountable as compared to a private education teacher. So this is the big difference in the pay scale that I am seeing right now. Very big difference in the pay scale. Second, I think I forgot the name of the teacher. There's a teacher in Uttar Pradesh for 24 years of her career, 23 years, she has never attended school. Her attendance has been going and salary has been coming. Now, who is going to be accountable for the government teachers to implement all what has been said? Who is going to take care of that and push that accountability and see that, yes, you have to stand accountable, be it the attendance of the teacher, be it the assessment or periodic assessment of the teacher, be it the upskilling of the teacher, the reskilling of the teacher, and then who's going to hold all of this accountable? That's a vague gray area, which this NEP has not touched. This is like I'm giving you a great book and to read, but there's nobody to accountable to make you understand about it or anything. So you can read it the way you want it if you have an intrinsic drive. Now that way it will not work. You look at a system like United States, I really would like to compare NEP with what the American system has. American system has this beautiful culture. If there's a government school in a particular area, all the business people and the renowned people in that area are put on the board of that government school. They are the ones who hold the accountability of all the government staff. Though the government pays the staff, the accountability to them lies with the local community leaders. So this way, what happens? The local community leaders hold them accountable and incentivize them with appreciation or some incentives from their own pockets because they are philanthropists of that particular area. I think somewhere down the line, a system like that, if it's created, I think that will create a lasting difference in our education system.
In a country like India, where obviously scale is, even when you compare a country like the USA to India, there is no comparison in terms of population scale. There's no comparison in terms of number of schools. And obviously the ratio of teachers and infrastructure to the number of students is very different when you compare both the countries. And I would go as far as to say it's a very unfair comparison at this point. Do you genuinely believe that bringing in local philanthropists and forming board of governors will actually lead to a spurt in the quality of education?
In the government sector, yes. In the government sector, for sure.
Obviously, you can't do it in the private sector because the private sector already has its own board of governors.
Let's take a state like Tamil Nadu. Okay, we have around close to 6,000 to 46,000 schools. Okay, this is the range that's coming. Under the government itself, you want 12,000 schools. You have one education secretary and one school education minister. Now, under him, you have a board of all the CEOs, AOs, DOs. So totally the whole admin is only around 50 to 60 people who are administrating all of these schools. Now just look at the logistics. Even if they visit 10 schools per day, they will not even cover quarter of the schools. Quarter of the schools they will not be able to cover in a year. So that's the humongous nature that we are talking about in India. The second thing that we are talking about in India, now, if you look at US and India, okay, it's an unfair comparison, agreed. Now, let's take Tamil Nadu and one state. Tamil Nadu has around 75 million people. Now, take us one half of the US, which has 75 million people. Why not compare those two? Now, it's no way Tamil Nadu is down. In fact, Tamil Nadu in many parameters is way ahead. Be it the gross enrollment ratio, the school dropout rates, we are way ahead of anywhere else in India. But that's where the social inequality is also coming. And that's where we need to bridge that gap. How do we incentivize a Bihar? How do we incentivize Uttar Pradesh for children to come back? See, 2 crore children are out of schools, which they want to bring back. Now, these children are out of school not because there are no good schools alone, because they're in the low socioeconomic areas. The poverty is a huge issue. The children have to go out to work to fend for the families, for their own food of the families. So how are we going to bring these children back into the fold? What are the incentives you're going to give to the parents so the parent can send the child to the school? So none of this is actually mentioned inside of this NEP.
Doctor, you talked about dropouts. It's very interesting because I actually jotted the stat down to run it by you.
Yeah.
The NEP has quoted the NSSO survey from 2017-18. And it says that the number of out-of-school children, and this is 2 years ago, was roughly 3.22 crore across the country, right? Now, that's a massive number of dropouts. Right?
But it is not told why.
But tell me something.
That's the crux here.
Doctor. Tell me something. For a country like India, when you have over or almost 3.5 crore students who have been to school and have, not found a reason good enough to stay in school, or have for some reason left the school system. Does the NEP actually address this in
No.
terms of bringing those kids back?
It
And
doesn't talk about the methodologies of how to bring the kids back. No. As far as I have read it went through the document, how do we bring the kids back? Who's going to hold the kids accountable? Who's going to incentivize their parents? So because most of the children, as far as in my opinion, one is the accessibility. There's no school in their location, so they don't want to travel for, so they drop out of school. Second is genuinely they have poverty as an issue. There's no food in the house. The child has to go to the farm, work in the farm, and that's how the food comes onto the table in the house. The third thing that I want is a tremendous amount of disinterest, among children. They like to loiter around and there is no accountability for these children. So how are we going to inspire these children to take education seriously? How are we going to help and support the parents to send these children to school again? So these are issues that have not been dealt with in the NEP. It's not been going in depth into the NEP.
It's interesting because you again said that you hit the nail on the head. You said that children are just not interested. Sometimes it's very difficult for teachers and for parents to accept the fact that just because you have a school, just because somebody is teaching lessons, just because a teacher may or may not make it to class, may or may not even take class. I'm of course talking about systems where there are single teacher schools, systems where there is, like you said, no regulation, teachers may not show up, or even in private schools for that matter. It's very, very difficult to engage a child. That is a simple truth today. But having said that, with LiveLife, I've seen that one of your greatest talking points is that you attempt to engage children in a multitude of ways. You use song, you use dance, you use pop culture, you use relatable language. And the NEP does talk about this. In fact, to quote the NEP, it talks about giving kids an enjoyable experience in school, right? And it even outlines how to give, children an enjoyable experience. It talks about using lesser portions. It uses the word lighter subjects in the early half of their school life. It talks about bringing in song and dance and music and all of these things, which we've already been exposed to. But of course, it's giving it a little more shape right now.
Shape to it, yeah.
If you had the option to actually formulate that bit of the policy and talk about how to make learning enjoyable and effective for school children, what would you do?
So I would really, really engage a lot more of dance, dance and kind of see children are of three types. One is the auditory child, the second is the visual child, and the third is the kinesthetic child. You need to take care of these three areas inside of any curriculum you set for children. For a visual child, it could be painting, it could be drawing, it could be artwork, it could be, storytelling or something small in the visual field. For an auditory child, it could be singing. It could be, something to do with the hearing aspects, bhajan chanting. It could be anything on that area. And a kinesthetic child could be dance, expression, creativity. All of this can also come in the syllabus. Second, please understand, Daniel, that any policy that we give, unless there is a buy-in from the teachers and the parents, it will fall flat. It will fall flat. So when will the parents buy in? Parents are all buying in for extracurricular activity till 7th standard. After that 7th standard it goes purely in an academic mode. PT classes are all cut, everything is cut. So what happens to the child? That all the extracurricular he realized was just entertainment and he cannot pursue any of that as a career option. Why? Because there's no other opportunity available in the school they're putting. So my take, my simple suggestion is, Daniel, if I had to do it, okay, let's assume I am the minister. If I have to do it, what I would have done is I would have split the schools. Say, for example, if this is a school where sports is going to be given preference. So that means the school has a ground and all the facilities, and children of that area who are really good in sports, if they want to pursue more of sports, they go into that field. This is a school where academics is going to be focused more. So now if you're more prone to academics, you can go into that school. This is a school where art, culture is also going to be focused more. You got the best teachers in this school. So like you can split this 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4 into these segments. So if you can say 5 is where the formative, it is uniform for everybody. The first 3 is where the child gets all these exposures. The next 3, he can go to a formative schools which has vocational training and this. And the last 4, he can go into the one where his whole expression gets filmed. Now, genuinely, maybe you're not good in basketball. Okay, you're really not good in basketball. You might have a best friend who's extraordinary in basketball. Now, your school does not even provide a ring. Now, what happens to your talent? You sit frustrated every day in the maths class waiting for that time where once in a week or sometime where you will get to play. Are you getting that? So my take would be split up the schools so that whichever schools can afford to have like that, children will go into that particular school, like how you have engineering stream. In engineering, you have a university engineering like an SRM VIT, and Anna University engineering like a Sairam Engineering College. Then you have another college of another university. So you can split it up and you can choose which one you want and give the choice to the children. Children and the parents, let them make an informed decision. The second thing I love the fact that, we are encouraging all of this. We are trying to bring a holistic system. Unless and until you link college education to this holistic system, nothing will change. That is when the parent knows that even if my child plays cricket every day of 12th standard, how well he plays the cricket has a bearing into the good education he gets in, provided he gets a basic fundamental cutoff in his academics, then parents will go gung-ho with the system. Unless you get a buy-in from the parent, because who is the parent who's putting the child into a tuition class or a coaching class? It's the parent at the end of the day, because they have an aspiration that if my child gets into IIT or if the child gets into NIT, life is sorted. So unless and until we bring the parents on board and there is an incentive like academic brilliance also. See, like for example, I have a friend of mine who got into Harvard because she played for the state tennis team in the US. State tennis team. Now, because of it, she got into Harvard. So her academics was also good, but her sports was so good that Harvard wanted her as a sports person. So like that, unless you incentivize the holistic, see, if you put extracurricular as extracurricular, then it is only in the extra domain. It's not the real curriculum. People look at it like an entertainment. Unless you bring that into mainstream and say, yes, this and that go imbibed together, that's where you have the more and more of the buy-in. That's where the buy-in comes in. That's where the parents come in. See, today parents are innocent. They don't have the kind of exposure because today we have children of a technology exposure. So now what do we need to do as parents? We need to be well-versed ourselves. Now, I'll tell you a simple example from my life. I was well-versed with knowing about what is happening because I am in the education. The moment the lockdown came, I was very excited because now there's an opportunity for me to educate my child because she had so much of time. I put her in the best coding classes, and look at this, that her article on coding has come in the newspaper. That my daughter has started her own coding center and she's starting to teach coding to people. Can you see that? It's starting. Now, why did that happen? Because I as a father knew that adapting her to technology early, where we teach digital etiquette, is very, very important. Now, I want to tell any of the policymakers, digital literacy is fundamental. That means what? How to use the online, what is the good and bad, what is the cyberbullying, how not to get into that has to be educated, which nothing mentions in the NEP.
They talk about bringing in coding as one of the essential vocational skills in
artificial intelligence and coding, yes.
Artificial intelligence and coding. So that's a very good move, don't you think?
Excellent move, excellent move. But who's going to teach it? How are we going to get the best coders to come and teach the grassroots level schools? There's no mention about that. Because if you look at coding, what do you need in coding? You need a great software, you need great hardware, and you need a great teacher. Now, all three, who's going to fund? Who's going to get this done and who's going to get this implemented? Now, if private schools have to implement this, say the private school decides to get the best coder from a Cognizant or somewhere will cost 2 to 3 lakhs. Now, who's going to pay that coding? Can they increase the fees? Or is the fees be restricted? Now, fees is supposed to be restricted. There is a committee put on for fee regulation. Now, then what happens? The school does not get any incentive to get a good coder to come in. So what will they do? With the same old teacher, they will just do some activity and just to show it on record.
It will be substandard.
Yes, it will be substandard. Exactly. That's where the problem. That's where this falls flat. See, I think leave the education to the educators. You give them the framework and tell them to do it. Give the budget as per the affordability of the parents. Put it in that format. If the fees go above a period of amount, then put even tax for that. Use the tax money for the government school in that area. It can be a contribution to the government school. And I think that will really revolutionize. The day, I'm telling you again, the day who I am born to, where I am born, does not determine what I become in life. that is where you will see a real revolution in our education system.
Dr. Kannan, just to cap off this discussion, I'm going to come to your core area of expertise. That is where you began. Obviously, depression is a very big problem in India. We've seen, of course, we only remember depression when we hear of Sushant Singh Rajput or any other suitable celebrity ending their life by suicide. And that's the true sadness of it when you think about it, because some of the numbers that we're seeing in terms of how much youth are affected by depression, how much students are affected by depression are very scary. And you're somebody who experiences this firsthand. I'm sure you have a very large base of students and teachers coming to you and talking about their mental health problems. And yet, in the NEP, a cursory search reveals that mental health is mentioned just once on page number 12.
Yes.
And it's more of a passing mention. There's no real in-depth study, or there's no in-depth sort of pointer to talk about how mental health as an issue can be tackled. What are your thoughts on this? And what do you believe needs to be done in the context of where students are today with their mental health?
Very, very simple, Daniel. I have a 5-point policy that they need to follow. First, educate the teachers on mental health illnesses, how to identify, how to engage with children so that they are able to pick up the signs and symptoms at the earliest. This is the first step. Second, I truly and wholly believe that inside of the system itself, there should be an area on mental health where children are taught on the basics of mental health. Mental health does not include just depression and anxiety alone. Mental health also includes stress-related disorders, sleep disorders, anxiety disorders, even sexual disorders, including sexual perversion, sexuality, sex-related disorders. So all of this comes under mental illness. So children need to be sensitized according to the age as part of a system on this through a trained professional. A trained professional has to do it. It's not a hearsay kind of a thing. A trained professional has to do it. Third, the mental health of the children has the huge impact by the parents. Parents need to be counseled on how to handle children age-wise. So if you're going to do a 5+3+3+4 system, the +5 goes through is not what the +3 goes through. What the next +3 goes through is not what the +4 goes through. The issues are different. Adolescence issues are different. Primary issues are different. Kindergarten issues are different. So based on the issue, the parents also need to be sensitized on what things they can talk, how they can handle, what are the things, and there should be a robust training for the parents. So in the schools we partner with, first we train the teachers, then we train the students, and then we make it mandatory to get the parents also trained. Because many times the culprit is also the parent. It could be the parent, it could be their uncle, it could be the aunt, the child. So mental health has to be inculcated into the system, not just a page, just a mention. But I think in depth when you go, this is one. Second, something to be done on the stigma of mental health. See, today mental health is stigmatized. Oh, Sushant thinks suicide is given so much of TRP, so much of room rate, and it's like a kind of a sensationalism. I think the stigma attached should move out, and it should be, people must be given a free space to come out. Now, when will that come out? Through awareness programs, sensitization programs. The third, having a school counselor, so that who is more familiar with it, so that the children can open out their feelings to the school counselor and then share their feelings with the school counselor. So a trained professional counseling should come. In fact, I truly and wholly believe in the training for teacher training itself, mental health should be part of the new BE system. When you train the child in the teachers in B.Ed, which is going to be from 3 years to 4 years, I think every teacher must go through a exam on psychology and mental health and how you assess it and how do you treat it. So these are the issues I think should go into NEP, which NEP is not mentioned, though it's just a broad. I truly hope that the next ones, that when it comes to implementation, all of this will be taken into account. And creating a safe space, a helpline. See, sometimes suicide is always impulsive also. So that time a safety net or a helpline that they can call to and share their feelings out, get counseled immediately. Something like this with tying up with good NGOs, good institutions should happen. This is my take on that. And mental health of teachers is also very, very important. And another very, very strong area is the relationship between teacher, parent, and student. This cohesion should happen. When this cohesion happens, only a nice environment is created for the child. And awareness also for the other students on bullying. Today, I tell you, Daniel, bullying is a very big issue in schools today. It's the undersaid issue in schools. Many children's academic performance is going down because of bullying. But when you ask them, they will not accept it. But inside of the class, it's happening. Why don't children come out with bullying? Because of the stigma attached to it. They don't want to look as weak. I think this artificial way in which we say a successful person is strong and happy and all that should go and say that yes, failure is also part of life. Learn from the failure. If you cannot learn and adapt yourself, seek help. And there's nothing wrong to seek help. I think that should be something that we should come out with. Yes.
That's a very strong note to end on. And I really hope that when the implementation does happen, that's something that the policymakers really take away. Mental health, a lot of thought into how the policy itself plays out and to ensure that everybody is included. Thank you so much, Dr. Kannan, for some very straight answers and for some very, very rejuvenating conversation.
Thank you. And I take last signing off message to you, Daniel. You're doing phenomenal work in education. I think the New Indian Express, in spite of the lockdown, you're doing great work to empower children. My take for all of you is NEP is a brilliant concept on a document, but I think we as a society should come together. Enough is enough. Let's all join hands together, implement it in truest spirits possible by helping each other, collaborating with each other, and bringing every stakeholder on board and bring a beautiful environment, because our children are our future. They are our legacy. Let's join together to stay for this legacy together. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kannan. Pleasure having you with us. Do feel free to like, share, and subscribe. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.